We can say whatever we want to the people around us. We can tell whatever story we feel people around us want to hear. We can post whatever fancy thing we want on Instagram or social media and make believe whatever we want people to believe. At the end of the day, we know what's right and what's wrong, what's true and what's false. Until we get to a point where we're accepting we don't have to be perfect, that none of us are. We have the capacity to start to make the change to being better or being different. We have to hold ourselves accountable because we know what's right, what's wrong, what's true, what's false.
I have a remarkable guest joining us, Sean Robinson. Sean is a 39-year-old author, speaker, and motivator who focuses on self-improvement, mindset shifting, and habit forming. Residing in Ontario, Canada, Sean balanced his professional life in the construction industry with his role as a volunteer firefighter, husband, and father of 3. In his debut book, Going Dry, My Path Overcoming Habitual Drinking, Sean shares his journey from a life that was far from fulfilling, and at one point he found himself struggling with anger, weight issues, and excessive drinking, rooted in deep-seated beliefs and habits formed from a young age. This isn't a tale of an overnight transformation or a traumatic event. Rather, it's a story of a man who decided that life could be better. Through thoughtful introspection, dedication, and hard work, Sean has made significant changes, becoming a better person, husband, and father. And with extensive experience in identity and mindset shifts, alcohol sobriety, journaling, and tackling toxic masculinity and generational trauma, Sean brings a wealth of knowledge to the table. He's also an advocate for positive parenting and has a passion for long-distance running, having used these practices to aid his transformation. Sean has shared his insights on more than 70 podcasts around the world, and today I'm really thrilled to have him share his journey with us. We're going to explore topics like overcoming deeply ingrained habits, the importance of self-belief, and practical steps to initiate change, and his experiences in various aspects of self-improvement will provide valuable insights for anyone looking to make positive and constructive changes in their lives. Sean, welcome to the Transcendent Minds podcast.
Thank you, Peter. I appreciate being here.
I'd like to start off with the first chapter where you describe a common pattern of making New Year's resolutions, particularly related to drinking habits and the cycle of postponement and failure that often follows. What inspired you to share your journey with alcohol in such a candid manner?
I've always had some version of a resolution or a January goal. I don't think I ever went into it as seriously as I did this time. It was just always because of people around me were doing it, or the media was promoting this new January thing. And when the things leading up to that moment and deciding to make that change and to commit to it, it had felt a lot different. But I never went into making a lifestyle transition in the form of that January goal, that resolution, to share it to anybody. It never crossed my mind that I was going to end up writing this book, or that I would continue from there in all the ways of my vulnerability and sharing. When I got to that moment, it was really a lifestyle that I was trying to correct by living healthier. And it seemed that healthy living that I was looking for started with what was originally a break from drinking alcohol, because there was so much that I felt personally were coming from that, with staying up late and overeating and the snacking and just general attitude.
It's a complex dance between the interplay between habits and taking an initiative, which is what many people do for New Year's. And it does shape our lives in many different ways. I call it the rocking chair analogy, because if you imagine a rocking chair which moves back and forth, you're moving forward into an initiative, but backward into old familiar patterns, which is your habits. That rocking motion symbolizes how we often set out with new intentions and plans, whether it's diet changes or exercise routines or quitting some sort of addiction, whether it's shopping or alcohol, whatever it might be. We're pulled back, we're reclaimed by our established habits. And biologically, those habits are deeply ingrained patterns in the brain, and they're often supported by neural pathways that are well established because of the repeated use. That part of the brain that's associated with habit formation helps to automate repetitive tasks. It makes behaviors feel like second nature. That efficiency is beneficial for conserving cognitive resources, but can also make it really challenging to adopt new behaviors because the brain tends to default to established pathways, especially under stress or fatigue. How common do you think this cycle of failed resolutions is among people struggling, as an example, with their drinking habits?
I think it's extremely common. And speaking from my own different versions of that resolution over the years, I never really went into it with the tools to be successful. My mindset was I just had to figure it out on my own, or that I had what I needed for knowledge and I was just going to figure it out, until I realized that I could read the book or listen to the podcast or ask the question to somebody that could give me more information. Did I realize I didn't know how to correct these habits? I didn't know what was going to help me be successful in changing these behaviors. And it wasn't even in my mind when I started, because like I still had to figure it out on my own. But every other time I had a resolution, not only that, but I would rely on the people around me and their resolutions or their goals to help propel me. So many people, including who I used to be, would fall off that resolution or that goal quickly after setting it. So when someone around me was saying, I'm not going to do this anymore, I made it, I'm good, I had a couple weeks, I would be like, oh yeah, a couple weeks is good, let's just go back to whatever. With all of those processes of setting those habits and those routines, we don't give ourselves enough time to establish that new habit or that new lifestyle. I would learn as I would go through that January, February, 100-day mark to develop into this new habit or getting rid of an old habit. It is really difficult. And I think it's really common that people just automatically go back to those old habits and behaviors because it's what we're used to doing.
Psychologically, habits provide comfort, a sense of stability, reduce uncertainty, help you feel more in control. Whereas if you flare into an initiative to try and quit or do something different, that requires a lot of effort. And it often comes with uncertainty and the potential for failure. This creates a psychological resistance to change because the mind will gravitate towards the familiar, even when it knows that change will lead to better outcomes. You detail the drinking routine in your book and how it has become ingrained in various aspects of your life, from social gatherings to everyday activities. At what point did you realize that your problem had become a problematic routine as distinct than a social activity?
There was definitely different moments, different evenings. I'd wake up the next day, I wouldn't remember. I spend all this money on a concert or a game and not remember any of it, or a different function. Because a lot of my habits were around how I presented at a function or at a festival. It was in those moments where I'd get to a certain point and then not remember the next day, or I'd hear how I behaved or what I might have said and be really shameful of that person that showed up later in the night. It was just the common acceptance of alcohol in those moments where I didn't picture any different. It would get to a point almost every time where it was like I'd be the same version, even if I tried not to. So it started to pose a problem when it just wasn't getting any better. I'd go to a function, or even if it was a Friday night and I had friends over, I'd be defending myself the same way the next day to my wife or whoever, just to say, oh, you know what, I didn't do this though, so it's okay now. That to me became such a big problem when I realized that it wasn't getting any better. I wasn't giving myself that chance to learn and correct. And a lot of that came from an upbringing, and not only the social acceptance in the life I had at the time, but that upbringing, it was around me growing up. My parents did all that. They had their friends over, they had the functions, there was celebration, there was always a toast or a cheers or a version of a drink in hand during these things. I grew up never picturing it being any different. Grow up having that sober example. That wasn't the true story I felt I had to keep and show to my kids, to say, this is what we do in these moments. And changing that mindset, just it seemed like such a small thing at the time to take a small break from drinking, because I'm still not drinking, but in that moment I didn't know what I was doing. So it was just taking that break and being away from it for a period of time that gave me that clarity to say, you know what, I'm feeling better, I'm not showing up this way at functions, I'm creating the tools and the techniques to get through things I was so used to drinking before. And getting to that point where I could show up differently, it gave me that confidence to say, you know what? This problem that I was creating, this atmosphere that I was living, I can deal with it differently now and realize that it was more of a problem than I thought in the beginning.
Environment plays a key role. People think it's just willpower, but there is an intricate interplay between willpower and the environment. While willpower is often hailed as the key factor in overcoming addiction, the environment exerts a far more potent and persistent influence. Why is that? You've got environmental cues and triggers, and you get cue triggered behavior. The environment is filled with cues that can trigger addictive behaviors, especially if you've had that in your childhood, because that is in your subconscious mind and gets triggered into reactivity based on where you are at this present moment in your adult life. But especially for those who are trying to quit or recover from addiction, places, people, or even certain times of the day can be associated with substance use and trigger cravings and relapse. These cues are powerful enough to override anyone's willpower, which leads to relapse despite intentions. When you look at the contextual conditioning, addiction often involves learning associations between certain environments and the pleasurable effects of substances. This conditioning means that if an individual, say as an example, you have the willpower to abstain, but you're returning to an environment that's linked with the past, that can reignite cravings and the compulsion to use. You've also got social and cultural factors because your social environment and peer groups play a crucial role, because when you're surrounded by others who are drinking or using or whatever it is, that can normalize behavior and create social pressure to participate. So it makes it exceedingly difficult for any individual to resist, regardless of willpower. In some environments, there's a cultural acceptance or even encouraged, and that societal backdrop can diminish the perceived severity of the addiction and reduce your motivation to resist or seek help. So there's a lot. It's not so cut and dry as people may think it is. I'll just quit. But it doesn't quite work like that. There was a decision to attempt a dry January, and your approach to it was setting personal ground rules. Firstly, what ultimately motivated you to commit to a dry January? And can you elaborate on why you chose those specific 3 rules for your sobriety attempt? Was it 4 rules?
It ended up being 4 rules. So I had always had a weight problem growing up. It was always up and always down. And I'd found myself that the second year of COVID made all my habits and routines worse. I found myself at 320 pounds, just feeling miserable, both physically, mentally. And that version of me was just, I'd had enough of the weight up and down was, I think, natural, but I got to a point where I wasn't proud of who I was and needed something to change in order to start to feel better, start to lose weight, have more energy to play with my young kids, to do things that were for the better. January was coming and it just seemed a fresh start. It was everything I thought it was in the past. It was just one more attempt. Not that it was my last, but say one more attempt to try something. And that was mine this time. And it meant more to me, like I started to say earlier, because of that person I had become towards the end of 2020. When I started January, there was people that would come and they would not drink. And I always felt they were sitting in the corner and twisting their bottle of water in their hand or just judging everyone in the room. And when you're doing something, you're looking for that acceptance from everybody. And if someone's not participating, then they don't belong. I didn't want to be that awkward person if I'm going to now not drink, if I'm going to do something that I was so used to doing before. I set myself some rules. I wanted to still be involved. So one of my rules was to be involved. I didn't want to hide in my basement. I wanted to figure out how to still exist in these spaces with this person I thought I was trying to become. I wanted to show up and I wanted to just be involved. I didn't want to show up at these things and then just sit in the corner and flip my bottle of water around. I had a Yeti mug, a coffee cup that I would pour things in. And it gave me a mechanism to still be there and still seem like I'm participating the same way I used to, getting over the fact that I was the only one worried about what was in the cup. I could easily turn down offers for someone to go get drinks. As the people I was around started to realize that I was committing to this the way I was, it became easier for everyone. They weren't pushing it on me. I wanted to show up. I wanted to still be involved, and I wanted to give myself a chance. I wanted to commit to this. I didn't want to fall off the wagon, if you will, by mid-January because someone else wasn't committing to their goals. So I started to pay less attention to what the people around me were doing and more to what I needed to get done, what I needed to do, thinking that I just wasn't ready yet for that to be the end. I needed longer. There's a dry February commitment and it's a shorter month. So I thought this is perfect. I can get to closer to who I'm wanting to be, or at least figuring out what it is I'm trying to do by committing to another dry month. And as I started to get into February, I really opened up to trying to figure out more to help me get through that. And that came in the form of podcasts, that came in the form of books, audiobooks, reading, things that I didn't do before because I never felt like that was for me. I never felt like that was something that could be useful to me. I never felt like the people I was around working construction, and we talk about the culture and the lifestyle, but you have your work environment, and there's something about certain types of work that make us feel we have to show up a certain way. When people are drinking each night or on the weekends, you're coming in Mondays with your hangover stories and everybody's doing the same thing. It was a harder environment to talk about because in that tough masculine construction environment, as it mostly can be, it's like you can't be different or you don't belong. So I needed self-help space. I needed things I could do in the background, in my headphones, in my vehicle on the way to work that I could do to try and teach me these things. And podcasts and audiobooks just came in, and I started to learn more about habits and forming habits and lifestyle change and mindset shift and all the things I speak about now. I was learning at the time. I wasn't talking to anybody. There wasn't someone that could say, listen to Andrew Huberman, listen to Dr. Caroline Leaf. I couldn't relate to these people. So I was finding this entry by listening to people like Kobe Bryant or Terry Crews or Jim Carrey, celebrities, athletes that I felt like I could relate to because I at least knew who they were, to hear their story, hear their version. Once I started to get in this rabbit hole of self-help and personal development space, I started to appreciate the professionals and the doctors and that opinion or professional piece of work, because not only was I getting the version from the person I thought I knew and could relate to, but then I was getting the reasons why by the people that were behind their version. And a lot of that development, starting with taking 30 days off drinking, led me to the 60 days, led me to 100, and led me to the types of things that would change that lifestyle. I was doing this in every area. It wasn't just drinking. Like just brushing my teeth was something that I wasn't doing enough. Doing that twice a day was something I tried for the 100 days, and marking this stuff and keeping track of it so that I didn't lose place. I was seeing all these marks on my calendar and everything had a different meaning, a circle, a line, and testing myself after that 100-day mark just to see, is this stuff working? Is the stuff I'm learning actually sticking the way that they say it's going to? Starting with not drinking to getting to a point where I'm making these lifestyle changes was huge. It only took a couple months, right? It only took that starting point to get to a point where I was starting to find a bit of a difference.
Can you outline those four basic rules that you chose, and why did you choose those specific rules for your sobriety attempt?
So my first rule was no pretending. I didn't want to get into any of the 0%. I didn't want to go to mocktails. I felt like I needed a complete change. So I didn't want to pretend. I wanted to fit in. So about, like I said, a bottle of water, or sitting in the corner. At least if I had a coffee cup and I was pouring stuff into it, I could drink water. And then the other thing was I wanted to stay the course. I wanted to keep going. So no matter what temptation or atmosphere or trigger might come up, would have that cup and I'd put something else in it, or I would separate from that moment because like I was finding that belligerent, obnoxious part of the end of the night. I didn't need to be there for that. I could still go to a function and then leave at a certain point. Then nobody around me, my friends weren't going to give me a hard time. I was still there, but then I was leaving at a point where I just couldn't feel like I could handle it the same way. And the fourth rule I actually came up with quite a bit later because my book was my journal. It was a place where I kept all these thoughts and feelings and for myself. It was towards the end of that year where a friend of mine said, "Hey, how are things going?" And I just said, "Hey, oh shit, I can write a book." It dawned on me that I had this journal. I could do this. And while I was keeping track of this journal, I had a fourth rule, and it was like, no matter what happens, just have fun.
For individuals listening to this, how important do you think it is for individuals to set personal guidelines when trying to change their drinking habits?
I think if it's drinking or anything, if we don't have a guideline, it's easy to fall off. I did not realize how important that first 30 days was because I didn't even know what I was doing at the time. But as I learned more about habits and I learned more about these routines and changing, and if I was going to do this thing for this amount of time, if I didn't set that 30 days or I didn't set that goal, I didn't have anything to work towards. I could fall off at any moment, like getting to the middle of January and, oh, okay, I'm good. So, whatever we're working on, drinking or brushing our teeth, it's setting that goal gives us that path, gives us that end date or at least checkpoint. It became a checkpoint. So as I moved my goal from 30 days to 60 days to 100 days, each became a checkpoint. And not to say in the end, but in the end, for the sake of what I put in my book, it was committing to that full year became the new checkpoint. It became this, wow, I've never been this way. What if I could do this for this whole year? That would be so amazing and crazy because I would never have done this before. And setting that goal and reevaluating once we get to that goal became such a huge piece and a huge tool for me to be able to carry on and to be able to push beyond it.
In terms of your experience of continuing sobriety beyond January, beyond February, and the initial positive changes you noticed, what were some of the most surprising benefits you experienced in those first 2 or 3 months of sobriety?
My energy levels were awful before, and 320 pounds will do that. So it was quite a lot. Basically, I was noticing energy levels coming up. At the time, I had 3 kids under 7. They were busy. I did that with 2 boys. All they want to do is play outside. And I was excusing every moment. I didn't want to. Whatever I could do not to go and do that. Let's just play in here on the floor. And I was noticing my energy levels coming up. I was noticing my attitude. I was like so negative before. And I would find the negative in everything and be so cynical. I was finding myself looking for more positivity in the day or in the moment. Those energy levels and being more positive was translating into many other areas. And I was finding that energy to work out or to start walking or running as I started to get into endurance running. It was something that I could do that was different than I used to do, which helped me change the habits because I was replacing something with this new thing. I would be more positive, have more energy, and way more confidence. It was that confidence by seeing some difference and feeling different that really gave me that push to keep going or to try something else. I would try this 100 days or this habit change with anything, brushing my teeth or drinking more water or running or walking or trying to go a day without swearing at my kids or when they're around. It was something I could do that was different every 100 days. Pick something else. These habit changes are more cycles. And drinking, when I got to 100 days, it didn't feel like 100 days was enough. I was becoming more of the person I thought I wanted to be without even realizing it was going to work this way. I didn't want to go back. So changing it to a year and the challenges that I would have coming up in that year, being in my friend's wedding and everything else, were going to be quite a challenge. But it was going to be something that I'd never done before and a way to test it to make sure that 100 days I could reevaluate. And like brushing my teeth, I stopped tracking it. I stopped writing it down and realized how it had just become what I did now. I couldn't leave my house or I couldn't go to bed. I realized like, oh, I'd have to go back inside or I'd get out of bed to go and brush my teeth because I didn't do it. That has stuck even to this day. I look at the calendar that I keep track of right on the wall and I see if I don't do this today, then that box isn't going to have a check mark on it or that isn't going to have a circle. Do I really want to not keep this streak going?
You've got to have a line of purpose. As I was mentioning earlier in the rocking chair analogy, you can move forward into an initiative, which is what you were doing. Essentially, you're taking these initiatives until they became part of the automatic process of your human activities, of your human design. So brushing your teeth was automatic. You didn't have to think about it because it's an automatic process like breathing. but you need a strong line of purpose. That's essential for sustaining behavioral change. In the rocking chair analogy, if you don't interrupt that pattern, when you rock back, that's habit reclaiming you. When you rock forward, you're moving forwards towards an initiative. And purpose-driven initiatives are more likely to result in a sustained transformation because they're not just about changing a behavior, but they're about aligning that behavior with your core values and beliefs. And that alignment can provide the necessary motivation to persevere through the discomfort of change and the temptation to revert back to old habits. Trying to break any cycle, you need new knowledge. That's a critical factor in this dynamic because education can help you understand the benefits of change, the mechanism of habits, and strategies for breaking the cycle. Having knowledge will empower you by providing you with a toolkit of understanding and frameworks to approach change not only systematically, but scientifically, so you can forge a path forward. You can navigate the habit initiative cycle effectively. To do that, you need a multifaceted approach. You have to have awareness, you have to recognize the pattern of your habit and the pull that they exert. You have to establish a clear purpose, whether it's your calendar checkbox. You need to have support systems. There's a lot that goes into this. It's not a one and done kind of thing. I want to say that I really do applaud you for breaking that habit because it takes a huge amount of courage. I applaud you for the journey you've been on. I'm curious to know, how did your family react to these changes and how did that impact your motivation?
First, thank you for the acknowledgement. I appreciate it. My family, I didn't know what I was doing in the beginning. I wouldn't realize how important it was until later. There was conversations my wife and I had as I got to 3 months in, where she was like, you know what, I feel like we were going to have a really hard conversation soon. A lot of the things and the person that I was and the moments that was creating that, I decided to do this and then realized later that this was probably going to be forced on me in some way. And would I have been able to handle it the same? Would my attitude at the time been more resentful than supportive? And almost guaranteed it would have been. So having this conversation later was almost better because it hit me differently. It hit me in a way where it's like, wow, if I didn't do this, it may have been a whole lot different, and realize that we really don't have to wait until we have that conversation, until that moment comes to make that change or to make that decision to do something different than we were used to doing before. And to your question, my family was way supportive. Like my kids were excited to almost have me back, or at least my daughter was born a few months before I had decided to make these changes. She knows a different version of me than my older two boys do. And they were just loving this extra time, this energy that I had, seeing me run in these different events and being there at the finish line, watching me come across this half marathon or 5K or 10K, whatever I was doing, and showing signs of support. And they get to color these signs. And my wife would bring them there and then be at the finish line. They get to hold the medal. And for all the examples that I didn't have, we were doing all of this and there's no drinking. It's physical activity. It's things that they go and see, and that's the image they have, everybody cheering for everybody. And seeing that version of me and being able to do that stuff has been massive for my kids. My wife being more positive and bringing her this content that I'm listening to, because I've got this 45-minute to an hour commute to and from work. So I'm listening to almost a book or so a week in different podcasts, a couple a day, and bringing stuff home for her to try because she works at home, doesn't have the same time. I can paraphrase for her and she can focus on full episodes when I give her more of that content. So it's been a great support system and huge for almost everyone I'm around now, because as I moved into a leadership role at work, I give that to people that I work with, and having different goal setting and professional development plans set up. I'm giving more of this benefit to different things at work. It's not only a work environment, but it's helping them personally as well.
You talked about the discovery of podcasts and self-improvement content, which opened up new perspectives for your personal growth. How did your newfound interest in podcasts and self-improvement content influence your sobriety journey?
I went into it thinking I had to fix it myself and do these things. I wasn't going to get the tools until I changed the saying, you do everything the same, it's going to be the same. So until I started to do something different, was I going to give myself something different than I ever had before? I found that by listening to different podcasts and finding the themes that I felt I could relate to, because I wasn't coming from that catastrophic moment to force me into change. It was going to head that way if I didn't make a change. Not having to wait for that moment was something that these podcasts and this information was giving me the tools, almost like planting that seed. The podcasts and the information I was getting with my old mindset was planting that seed in me to grow into what it is now, to say, what if you did this instead of you have to do this or else? It's more, I was picking up the different little pieces that I could be like, hey, what about changing that habit? Or what about trying this thing? Like, or keeping track for 100 days, or trying it differently than I used to, until I branched out and opened up to the different perspectives and the different literature. Was I ever going to get the tools and the information to give me anything to be successful?
That's interesting because some podcasts can be educational. Like yourself, I listen to different podcasts and I get an education out of it. As long as I know it's peer reviewed and it's not waffle or some highfalutin content, I think they're a great source of education if you're listening to the right podcast and the content is well researched.
I agree with you 100%, but I think it gives a different perspective too. And I used to compare myself to everyone. I would compare myself to, as we do naturally, I would compare myself to everybody I was drinking with and around, to either gauge how I could handle my own drinking or how I was in an evening, but also comparing when I wasn't, and when I was doing things like running. We can only take what we relate to. We can only take the parts and pieces that make sense to where we are at in our lives. If I'm going to listen to a podcast with someone that's a full distance ultra marathon runner in an entry level point, I can only take the pieces that make sense to me right now. There's a lot of things that you learn from that professional, if you will, opinion or version to an entry level point. And while I can't relate to where Ed Milet is at in his life and all the things that he does or anyone like him, I can take a lot of the messages he gives or someone like him to where I'm currently at. And as long as I stop comparing to feel like I have to be the same as where that person is, I found I was a lot more successful achieving the things I was working on. The different podcasts gave me that version because I could listen to, obviously, as you say, somebody that's credible or speaking to some researched content. I could take the version that makes sense to me right now and put it in place where I could use it and not feel like it was out of my league or next level.
One of the key things when we're comparing ourselves to other, we're actually abandoning our own lives. We're not coming into our own. We see everything as a comparison. You're not living your life. You're not in the present. You're not in your body. You're not in your mind. That's key because many people do that. And when they do, they're abandoning their lives. In terms of listening to podcasts, were there any key insights or lessons from these resources that particularly resonated? And if there were, can you share one or two?
I think Atomic Habits, James Clear, listening to him talk on different podcasts led me to listening to and reading his book, Atomic Habits, and learning about the different habits and habit stacking. And those different things was a huge thing for me. But I think overall, it was about being open to change and being open to doing things differently than I used to. And Dr. Carolyn Leaf talking about brains and telomeres and all those, but also changing a lifestyle and the cycles of change. Whereas we get stuck on that 21-day cycle to change a habit. But after 21 days, if it's not a new habit, it's easy for us to lean back on our rocking chair. It's to think about it as a cycle. It's okay, 21 days, or as I got to different versions of that, is that enough? Do I feel like that's enough for whatever it is I'm working on? So hearing her describe 21-day or 60-day cycle as a way to reevaluate was pretty huge for me. And a lot about vulnerability, listening to Brene Brown and Lewis Howes talk about his book, and really just learning about vulnerability to be more vulnerable myself and share this version for who I used to be and anyone that could relate to the portions of what I've been able to work on, for the sake of realizing that they can do it too. It's, are you open to changing things that you may not have been open to change before, or doing things that are different, or being different in an environment that you were used to being a different way? It's out there, but I didn't realize it before. I didn't see it the same way as I do now.
How has your perception of vulnerability and asking for help changed since the beginning of your sobriety journey?
It's a lot different. Before, when I was hiding behind this tough, masculine construction firefighter father, that I thought I had to be hiding behind that to say, I don't need any of these things. I'm tough and I'll figure it out on my own. To realize that we're all dealing with our own versions of a lot of the same things. A lot of this stuff is in our own heads. It's a lot easier to be open and to say, you know what, I made a mistake, or I was doing things incorrectly, or I've learned better, so now I'm doing better. It was a big realization for me, and vulnerability and being open about the things that we weren't doing correctly, or the things that we want to do better, or asking a question or sharing a story, especially to help someone else that might be going through the same thing. We find strength in numbers. Hey, you know what? Like, I can relate to that. So let me read some of these books, or let me listen to some of these people, and let's just ask this guy a question to say, hey, you know what? I'm going through a similar thing. Talk to me about this cup that you got, and like, how did that become useful, or whatever version of that is. We don't all have it figured out. The more we are open about the things we're working on, the things that worked and didn't work, can someone else take the pieces that might work for them as well, and find confidence through others. We're not reinventing the wheel here. All these things we're all talking about and we're all working on have all been done before. If they've been done before, you can do it too.
You mentioned in your book there was a rising realization that staying sober through different seasons and activities presented new challenges for you, particularly during summer. How did you prepare yourself mentally for facing alcohol centric activities like summer barbecues and camping trips?
I think the benefit that I had was timing. Because I started in January, I had January, February, March, April before it got to a point where the summer, the nicer weather for me in Eastern Ontario, Canada, started to get warmer, started to get more open, and the patios and all the things were more available. So having 3, 4 months in before that real temptation came gave me more of those tools and more confidence going into it. At that point, I'd already committed to the full year. I still had the challenges in those 4 months, but it was less about that summer vacation or cottage season. It was more about getting through the rest of the holiday season and January holiday stuff and different weddings and winter functions. It was more about having that good 3, 4 months starting point by the time that the nicer weather came. But if it was then or it was earlier, it was knowing that I wanted it bad enough this time, that I wanted to make it work. The things I started to learn were giving me more confidence that I actually could make it work this time. Because when we don't set that goal and we don't have that guideline, we don't really have a direction. It doesn't give us anything to work towards. It's easy to just say, oh, it doesn't work this time. I'll try again next January, or wait till the end of the month, or whatever version that becomes. I had the guideline and I had that tool, being that coffee cup, or even the people around me starting to learn the person that was more becoming now. I wasn't someone that wanted to go out and have drinks. I wanted to go out, but I didn't need to drink the same thing. I didn't need to be doing shots, and I didn't need to be doing the double tequila, whatever's my friends were having on these guy trips that I would still go on. It was like realizing that I could show up however I wanted to show up and still have a good time. I don't know why I didn't realize that before.
One of the cousins of habits is rationalizing yourself into immobility. You don't go ahead and do anything because you can rationalize, you can justify why you're not doing, why you're not moving on. Your observation of others' reactions to your choice not to drink, which included disbelief and pressure and curiosity. How did you handle the constant questioning and pressure from others about your choice not to drink?
It was a struggle in the beginning for sure, because I wasn't sure yet what I was doing. I didn't commit to January to say, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. I'm going to do this for the full year. I'm just going to get through January. As things came up, it was easy for me to push it off, to be like, oh yeah, it's just January. When February came, oh, I'm just going to do February. It was more when my friend had asked me to be in his wedding, and he was in my wedding, and we drank a lot at my wedding, but I wasn't drinking this time. For him to say, you better drink at my wedding every single time we had a wedding function. So it was a lot because I felt my old self, I had to show up a certain way for this person. I had to show up the way I was used to. I had to show up the way I was brought up to show up, to present myself a certain way. As I got more defined as the year went on, that this was going to be who I was, I didn't feel like I needed to show up a certain way. I was able to tell the people around me that. I was able to say, you know what, this is what I'm doing right now. And even up until New Year's Eve, the same friend was like, oh, you can't have a drink yet. It's not New Year's. It was the day before my next checkpoint, and I was still getting these little pokes. We're fine now because we've grown and I've established these boundaries. But in that moment, I had to learn about boundaries in order to set them. I was trying to achieve in order to relay that to others. And it's not to say that we have to set these goals and pass it by the people around us. It's not that at all. But really, the people around us should be able to understand who we're trying to be or what we're trying to be in an effort to support that person. If these people don't want to support that person, then we need to work our way to people that will support it. That was a struggle in itself too, because I felt if I was going to be different, I was going to lose all of the friends I had. I can't be the same person and have the same friends. Just going to happen. And I stressed a lot about it because it's not that immediate. Anytime in life, you go to a different school, you start to grow apart from people. You grow closer to other people. It's the same thing. You start a different job. You may not spend all the time with the people you used to at your old jobs. Do you stay together? Do you grow apart? When you start to make these lifestyle changes, I was naturally growing apart from people. And it's not as immediate as I was stressing about. It was more gradual and grow apart from people, grow closer to other people, and grow closer to the same people for different reasons. There's people that I used to just drink with, and that was the thing we had. When I didn't drink anymore, I naturally wanted to be somewhere else.
Boundaries are important because without them, it becomes a battlefield. And like you alluded to, it's important that other people support you. But if you continually or consistently show up in the way that you show up, you're actually teaching them that is how you're going to show up. They will support that. And that becomes part of the battlefield. So the boundary is important. Many a time we either go into blame and avoidance rather than truth and responsibility. They're on the same line. So we can blame other people for the way that we are, but we're teaching them it's okay to be the way that we are. So they expect from you and you show up in that way because that's the expectation until the re-education process starts to happen. And like you said, it takes time because you're re-educating yourself, then you've got to re-educate others, and some people will fall away from your circle because there's an incompatibility of alignment with the boundaries you are holding down that isn't part of their hierarchy of values. How has your experience changed in the way that you view societal attitudes towards alcohol and sobriety?
There's still a struggle because it's a business, right? There's a lot of money made on like these concerts and functions that I would go to a certain way before. Like they're all sponsored by these companies now. You can't go to a sporting event that's not abundant with all of these things because that's where they get their money from for the most part. For me now, it's knowing that I'm not interested in those things. That doesn't mean I don't have any judgment to people that do. I just knew what it made me, and I appreciate remembering these things. I appreciate the way that I show up. Honestly, I do enjoy 0% beers or whatever now, but I use them differently. I use them not as a replacement for what I had before, because it was about 8 months before I allowed that. There's a lot of growth in the mocktail non-alcoholic sector, and it can be easier to participate in a sense where you're still having that thing, but you're not the alcohol content, which is the bigger part. You're not getting the same effect. So to go to these things, I think because it's more acceptable or seems to be more acceptable, it's a lot easier to not drink at a function and for me to show up the way I want to. And about setting boundaries, it has to be important to me, right? If I don't feel that this boundary I'm trying to set is important, then I'm going to let other people walk over it too.
In your book, you talk about your experience at the annual pig roast, which is traditionally a day-long drinking event. And you reflect on how your approach to this event has changed since becoming sober. How did your experience at the pig roast differ this year compared to previous years? What surprised you most about attending this event sober?
It's funny because these events I can see how I used to be through the people that are still doing these things. I enjoy it a bit better because I know, wow, I'm not going to feel like that person is the next day. And it's not in a place to hold that judgment, but it's a affirmation for me to be like, wow, I used to feel terrible the next day, or I used to do that. And I can still be here now and not be that way tomorrow. To show up, to realize that I could still have just as much fun drinking water out of a cup than showing up at 8 in the morning to get the pig started and then drink all day and all night and be miserable for the next week. I could still show up and play horseshoes or bocce ball and participate in all the ways that I did before. Also play with the kids and be involved that way and create more memories for myself and for my family. I find it a lot more enjoyable now because I can still do all the things that I enjoyed before playing the games, but also bringing that home and remembering it as a group.
You reflect in your book about your wife's drinking habits and how that's changed over the years, and how you'd previously hoped that she would return to drinking more heavily with you. How has your perspective of your wife's drinking habits changed throughout your sobriety journey? How has this affected your relationship?
The beginning, as you say, I was becoming more judgmental because she got to a point, and it was great because of our kids when she wasn't drinking during pregnancy or during breastfeeding. As we had more kids, it was almost like she spent way more time not drinking, which meant that I could drink more, which was a negative effect for me. We always went to concerts. We'd stay overnight and camping and different things. We would drink together, and it would seem like that was something we had while we had the kids, and that life started to grow. She didn't have the same relationship with drinking that I did. She got to a point where with the kids, she was more interested in being able to go somewhere if she had to, or be available if the kids needed something. And not that I wasn't, but it was easy for me because she was always be the one that was drinking at a function. As I've grown through my sobriety, and she doesn't drink much either anymore. She just doesn't like what it does to her. And through my own effort, I'm not pushing her to be that way. I'm not pushing and hoping that she returns to that, because while we can still have alcohol in the house, because I'm not running to it or I don't need it, it's there. If she wants to drink, it's there if we have guests. It's something that I never felt like I had to completely remove, whereas another person may not even be able to have it. She doesn't drink, and it's really strengthened because we're not spending the money on it, but we can have it or we can't.
You reflect on how your sobriety has allowed you to see clearly what the end of the night looks like for heavy drinkers, and how this has reinforced your decision to stay sober. How has your ability to observe others' drinking behavior while sober influenced your thoughts on your own post-drinking habits? Has this changed your future plans regarding alcohol consumption?
Yeah, definitely. I don't think we know how we show up at the end of the night. It's one thing to have a couple drinks and then that's it. That doesn't affect us the same way. And but to keep doing that all night and to pound them back and be on whatever mission I used to be on, I never saw that person. And when someone would tell me, my wife would say, "You said and did this last night." No, I didn't. I wouldn't. It wouldn't hit me the same way because I didn't see it. I would hear it like, yeah, there's no way it was that bad. It can be that bad. Like at the end of the night, I'm seeing other people and thinking, not to judge them because I'm not doing that, but to picture how I used to be. That person is doing that thing and saying those things and having that attitude. And that's, wow, these things must have been true. If this is how I was going to behave or worse, I'm much better off now. There's definitely still moments where I see that and it's, wow, it's almost affirmation to say I'm doing the right thing because I'm not going to feel that way or I'm not going to behave that way. That doesn't mean people need to stop drinking, but I was happy to at least see a version of that myself, to affirm what I was told I used to behave like, to realize that I didn't want to show up that way ever again.
In your book, Going Dry, there were several social situations where you successfully navigated not drinking, and you noted feeling less anxious about these situations as time went on. As you approached the end of your year of sobriety, how did your confidence in social situations evolve?
I had a way more confidence at the end. It was because in the beginning, I didn't have a concept of going to these things and not having at least one drink, or if we were staying overnight, having several. As I started to go to these functions purposefully because I wanted to still be involved, like we said about the rules I'd created, I'd go to these things and it's okay, I got to come here. How am I going to navigate this? And really start to create a different version of myself in this moment. By the end of that year, I gave myself more memories of how I was able to handle different moments and what might come up or did come up and what I did to navigate. Before, it was always about having a couple drinks or having more. Now it was about how not to do that. So now that I gave myself more concept of what it was like to go to these things and not drink, or play a round of golf and not drink, or camp and not drink, and just do these things completely sober, it gave me a context to how I can behave in that moment, but that I could do it. And lots of people can do it. Until I gave myself that example, I didn't have that example. So by the end of the year, the confidence came because of muscle memory. It came because of a concept of what I was like in that moment, showing up without something I thought I had to have so much before.
You went to Niagara Falls, where you faced numerous challenges in that social situation while remaining sober, and you observed your friends' drinking behaviors and reflecting on your own past habits. During the Niagara Falls trip, you mentioned feeling uncomfortable in loud, drunk environments. How has this realization affected your approach to social situations now? Has it changed the type of events that you choose to attend?
I think it does in a way, but I still want to be involved. I still want to be able to go out. And if I was to say I don't want to go out on a guy's trip ever again, then I'm going to start to resent. I've tried not to do that because it makes me want to go back to it. For me to continue to show up to these functions or go to Niagara Falls or go on a guy's trip and do it the way I want to do it, I can show up and I can have a mocktail or I can drink sparkling water. Every place has a version of something else. That doesn't mean, like I said in the book, where I had to order a virgin cocktail in front of all my buddies. I could order soda water and it shows up in a cup and it looks the same as everybody else's. And it's really how I associated it versus how everyone else did. And to go to those things is still important because, like I said, I don't want to go backwards because I start to resent not being able to do certain things. It's about giving myself the tools to show up the way that I want to show up. And really, nobody cares what we're drinking. You can go to a guy's trip, you can go whatever, family trips. If it's a family, as we start to learn, like my own brother started to say, because I turned a beer down at his house, oh, you can't have a beer, you don't have your coin yet, to play against AA and the different programs, which I wasn't in, but just to throw that jab at me, like I didn't need that. But if family's your pull or friends, it's learning how we want to show up and really sticking to that. And as I got through the year and even beyond, like I'm coming up on 4 years now, I can still do these things and show up the way that I want to show up and still have fun. Nobody around me feels like they have to show up differently. Now, at the end of the night, yes, I do still get the odd person trying to justify why I'm not drinking to a waitress or server, or I know how like I need to handle that. I know what to say, and I don't feel pressured to show up how anybody else wants me to show up. I show up how I want to.
It's clear you've been on a personal growth journey and you've experienced many challenges and many triumphs as well. You also mentioned you've experienced improved patience and motivation in relationships with your family. You mentioned becoming a better version of yourself for your family. Was there a specific moment or realization or an experience that stands out as particularly significant in your journey towards becoming this improved version of yourself?
I think it was realizing that the stuff that I was learning worked, like brushing my teeth. It was such a small thing that made such a massive impact because brushing your teeth twice a day is not a lot of work. I wasn't doing it enough. I didn't have bad dental hygiene by any means, but I just wasn't doing it as much as I should. Realizing that The habit structure works by tracking, by consistency, and doing something as small as brushing my teeth in the morning and at night and testing it out. It was teaching me or showing me the things I was learning worked, and that gave me the confidence to try bigger things, to try different things over a period of time, learning that we want everything in an instant in today's society, learning I'm not going to have it in an instant if I've given myself 30, 60, 100 days to do it. I can at least evaluate it in 2, 3 months. I'm not looking for it today or tomorrow because I'm going to look at it in 3 months' time. And giving that 3 months, it gives us a chance to see those results. For me to see the results gave me confidence and gave me reassurance. The things that I was doing were working. Once we see something change in ourselves and what we're working on, we create true confidence to be able to continue or to try something different or to realize what this version of me that wasn't reading, that wasn't listening to podcasts, that wasn't talking to people and being vulnerable, it wasn't going to get me here. I wasn't going to get to where I'm at by doing the same things or having the same attitude. Or where I was at, I felt like it was just going to show up for me one day. Like someday I was going to lose the weight and feel better, until I realized we have to put in an effort for that. We have to do something to get there. And losing 100 pounds, it didn't happen right away. It happened over 2, 3 years. If I stressed about the mountain of 100 pounds or the mountain of not drinking for a year, rather than just this week or today or for the next 30 days, January or whatever, don't even wait till January, do it now. Once I realized I didn't have to do it all today, I didn't have to lose 100 pounds by this weekend, I could really dig into it and continue, because it was going to end up at that if I kept going long enough. If you keep going long enough in anything we're working on, we're going to get there.
Absolutely. It's consistency. In the final chapter, in Going Dry, it's called It's Your Turn, Challenge Yourself. And you delve into the deeply personal journey of habit change, and you emphasize the role of self accountability, and you share the experience of quitting alcohol and highlighting true commitment to change. And it must come from within rather than external pressures. And you describe moments when you could have easily relapsed into old habits without anyone knowing, but you recognize that this would undermine your progress and integrity. I found the narrative really underscores the importance of being honest with oneself and the challenges of maintaining this honesty, especially when it would be so easy to deceive others. Can you share more about the internal dialogue or mindset shifts that helped you stay accountable to yourself?
Absolutely. We can say whatever we want to the people around us. We can tell whatever story we feel people around us want to hear. We can post whatever fancy thing we want on Instagram or social media and make believe whatever we want people to believe. At the end of the day, we know what's right and what's wrong, what's true and what's false. Until we get to a point where we're accepting we don't have to be perfect, that none of us are, we have the capacity to start to make the change to being better or being different. We have to hold ourselves accountable because we know what's right, what's wrong, what's true, what's false. For me, it was realizing that no matter what I said or did, I knew that I was going to have that drink or not. There was moments I was by myself and no one would know. No one would know at all. If it was a reason that I decided, she wouldn't know that I drank on a guy's weekend unless I came home. It was for me to hold myself accountable, knowing if I didn't do this, or when I decided to write this book and I was done the full year and I was reaching out to who I used to be, do I just want to run back and start drinking again? Or do I want to continue this lifestyle that I appreciated, this new sober person that I'd become, in an effort to not only continue to be that person, but to be able to give that message from a place that I'm not saying I did this for a year and then I'm going to talk about it and give people the tools and then, oh, but he's doing this again, or he's back at this level. I know what's true. I know how I showed up before and I know how I'm showing up now. And it didn't have to be perfect before. It doesn't have to be perfect now, but it can be better than it was. The only one that knows that is ourselves.
What advice would you give to someone struggling to maintain that level of honesty during a habit change?
I think the biggest thing is it doesn't have to be perfect. And no matter what it is that we're working on or where we're coming from, it doesn't have to be the same. and it can always be better. If we think about this thing as a giant mountain, we're going to give ourselves every excuse and every reason not to do it. But if we look at that mountain in small steps, and as much as all of those sayings go, eating the elephant isn't nothing more than a bite at a time. It's taking everything we want to do and breaking it down small, achievable, and realizing that it can be better. It will be better. We have to keep going and give ourselves some grace and benefit.
You've taken many small steps into a bigger world. Not all steps are equivalent. As we conclude this discussion, where can people find you? Where can people buy your book? And do you have any parting words?
My website, seanrobinson.ca. I have everything due for an update, but everything is accessible through my website. My book is on Amazon. It's probably the easiest place to get it. It's only 120 pages. It's not a huge thing. I wasn't a reader before. If I'm talking to who I used to be, it had to be something that I would have picked up where I used to be. Even though my journals were quite long, I kept it pretty much to the point and to a place where anybody coming from where I was, it would be something they would use and hopefully get benefit from. I'm on most social media platforms, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and it's Sean Robinson Mindset is my tag for most of those things. And it's about you, that changing mindset, that growth mindset that to have and I'm developing and that I'm coaching and promoting all these platforms. It's not impossible. Nothing that I've done, nothing I've been able to achieve is anything you can't do. Once we realize we can do anything we want to do, we can lose the weight, we can stop drinking, we can start exercise. I started distance running, and we can stop doing or start doing anything we want to do, and give yourself some grace and give yourself the tools to do it. If there's something you want to learn, find a podcast and listen to somebody that's done it, and they'll tell you way more than you think you might have known before.
That's well said, Sean. And how have you experienced the conversation today?
This is great, Peter. I'm happy to share. I think, like we said, with vulnerability and sharing our experiences, if we can't get them out there and we can't try to help someone else that might be going through a version that we've gone through, then we don't advance as a group. And we really should be more open to not only our imperfections, but to helping those that might need it.
Thank you so much, Sean. It's been an honor and a privilege. Thank you for your insight, your vulnerability, and your contribution, because there are others out there who may want to step up and stand tall, but they just don't know how to go about it. Hopefully this message will land, even if the ripple effect of this conversation has its impact on one person, that's good enough.
Absolutely. And thank you for having me, Peter. I appreciate it. And you do great work. Keep it up.
You're most welcome. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you.